The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. had never seen anything like this. Representative Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, her hands steady despite the storm brewing around her. The cameras clicked like machine guns as she held up a thick legal document, a $200 million zero-cent defamation lawsuit against Pam Bondi, Trump's nominee for Attorney General. But it wasn't the lawsuit that had everyone talking. It was the look on Bondi's face when she received the papers just minutes earlier, a mixture of shock, rage, and something else. Fear? The image had already gone viral, spreading across social media like wildfire. "Today marks a turning point," Crockett declared, her voice cutting through the chaos. "No one, regardless of their political connections, is above the law when it comes to destroying someone's reputation with lies." The crowd erupted. MAGA supporters shouted in protest, while progressives cheered. But all eyes were on Bondi, who sat frozen in the gallery, her famous composure completely shattered. What happened next would change American politics forever. But before we dive into this explosive confrontation, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to witness is the political showdown of the decade, and trust me, you don't want to miss a single second of what comes next. To understand why this moment was so explosive, we need to understand the two women at the center of this storm. Jasmine Crockett, the 42-year-old representative from Texas' 30th District, wasn't supposed to be here. Raised in St. Louis by a single mother who worked 3 jobs, Crockett had clawed her way through law school, becoming a civil rights attorney before entering politics. She was known for her fierce advocacy, her brilliant legal mind, and her refusal to back down from anyone, especially the Trump establishment. Standing just 5'4", Crockett had a presence that filled any room she entered. Her colleagues called her the Texas Tornado, not just for her home state, but for the way she could demolish opposition arguments in seconds. She'd made headlines before for her sharp questioning in congressional hearings, but nothing like this. On the other side stood Pam Bondi, 59, the polished former Florida Attorney General who'd become Trump's go-to legal warrior. Blonde, telegenic, and ruthlessly effective, Bondi had built her career on being untouchable. She'd survived every scandal, deflected every attack, and emerged from Trump's first administration with her reputation not just intact, but enhanced. Bondi came from privilege, private schools, connected parents, a path smoothed by money and influence. Where Crockett had to fight for every opportunity, Bondi had doors opened for her. Where Crockett spoke with the fire of someone who'd seen injustice firsthand, Bondi spoke with the cool confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place at the top. The stakes couldn't be higher. This wasn't just about money, though $200 million, 0 cents, would be the largest defamation lawsuit in political history. This was about power, truth, and who gets to shape the narrative in American politics. 3 weeks ago, Bondi had gone on Fox News and made a series of claims about Crockett that would prove to be her biggest mistake. She'd called Crockett corrupt, accused her of taking bribes from foreign governments, and most damningly claimed she had evidence that Crockett had betrayed her oath of office for personal gain. The problem? None of it was true, and Crockett had the receipts to prove it. But this lawsuit was about more than just clearing her name. Crockett knew that if Bondi became Attorney General with these lies unchallenged, it would set a precedent that anyone could destroy their political opponents with falsehoods and face no consequences. The establishment had already begun choosing sides. Trump had tweeted his support for Bondi within minutes of the lawsuit being filed. Frivolous lawsuit by failing Democrat, Bondi will crush her. Meanwhile, progressive leaders rallied behind Crockett, with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calling it the most important stand against defamation in modern politics. The media was in a frenzy. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, everyone was covering it. But they all missed the most important detail, something only a few people in that courthouse noticed. Bondi's hands were shaking as she held the lawsuit papers. The woman who'd never shown fear in her entire political career was visibly rattled. The roots of this confrontation went deeper than most people realized. It had started 6 months earlier, during a heated congressional hearing on judicial appointments. Crockett had been questioning one of Trump's federal judge nominees when Bondi, who was there as an advisor, had interrupted from the gallery, a serious breach of protocol. "Representative Crockett doesn't understand how the justice system works," Bondi had said, her voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps because she's more interested in grandstanding than governing. The comment had stung, but Crockett had maintained her composure, finishing her questioning with surgical precision. However, the moment had been caught on camera and the clip had gone viral. Not for Bondi's interruption, but for the look of cold fury that had flashed across Crockett's face before she'd composed herself. That should have been the end of it. A minor confrontation forgotten in the endless churn of political news. But Bondi had made a fatal error. She'd underestimated Jasmine Crockett. Over the next few months, Bondi had begun a campaign of what could only be described as character assassination. It started small, comments on conservative podcasts about Crockett being out of her depth. Then it escalated to opinion pieces in right-wing publications questioning Crockett's credentials and competence. But the real escalation came 3 weeks ago on that fateful Fox News appearance. Bondi had been invited on Hannity to discuss her potential nomination as Attorney General. The conversation had been going smoothly, softball questions, rehearsed answers, when Hannity had asked about potential opposition from Democrats. "Well, Sean," Bondi had said, leaning forward with that practiced sincerity she'd perfected over decades, "the real question is whether Democrats like Jasmine Crockett will put America first or their own interests. And based on what my sources are telling me, Crockett has some serious questions to answer about foreign money flowing into her campaign accounts." Hannity had pressed for details, and Bondi had delivered what would become the most costly words of her career. "I have evidence, and I'll be presenting it at the appropriate time, that Representative Crockett accepted bribes from Chinese nationals in exchange for opposing tough-on-win legislation. She's compromised, Sean. She's corrupt. And frankly, she's betrayed her oath of office." The studio had erupted. This wasn't just an accusation, it was a declaration of war. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Crockett corruption began trending, pushed by an army of MAGA accounts. Conservative media ran with the story without verification, and by morning, half of America believed Jasmine Crockett was a Chinese agent. But Crockett hadn't panicked. Instead, she'd done what she did best. She'd investigated. Working with a team of the best defamation lawyers in the country, she'd traced every claim, every source, every piece of evidence Bondi had referenced. What they found was stunning. Not only were the accusations false, but Bondi knew they were false. Internal emails, obtained through various sources, showed Bondi's team discussing how to create a narrative about Crockett, regardless of facts. One email, from Bondi herself, stated clearly, "We need something big on Crockett. If we can't find it, we'll have to get creative." The investigation had also uncovered something else, a pattern. This wasn't the first time Bondi had used false accusations to destroy a political opponent. There were at least 3 other cases, all settled quietly, all with non-disclosure agreements. But Crockett had found witnesses willing to talk, documents that had been missed in previous cover-ups. As the evidence mounted, Crockett had made a decision. She wouldn't just defend herself, she would go on the offensive. The lawsuit she was preparing wouldn't just be about defamation. It would expose an entire system of political destruction that Bondi had perfected over her career. The tension had been building for weeks. Crockett's team had been eerily quiet, offering no response to the accusations beyond a simple, "Representative Crockett categorically denies these false allegations and looks forward to addressing them through appropriate channels." Conservative media had taken the silence as weakness. "Crockett can't defend herself because she's guilty," one Fox News commentator had said. "If she had nothing to hide, she'd be fighting back. They had no idea what was coming." The first sign that something big was about to happen came when Crockett's attorney, David Boyce, the legendary litigator who'd taken on Microsoft and fought for marriage equality, was spotted entering the federal courthouse in D.C. with a team of associates carrying dozens of boxes. Within an hour, word had leaked. Jasmine Crockett was filing a massive lawsuit. But nobody knew the scale until she stood at that podium. The courthouse steps had become a battlefield. On one side, Crockett's supporters held signs reading, "Truth wins" and "Bondi lied." On the other, MAGA protesters shouted about the deep state and corrupt Democrats. The atmosphere was electric, dangerous even. Capitol Police had formed a barrier between the two groups, but the tension was palpable. Everyone knew this was about more than just 2 politicians. This was about the soul of American politics. Then Bondi had arrived. She'd stepped out of a black SUV wearing her signature red power suit, flanked by security. Her face had been a mask of confidence as she'd walked through the crowd, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters. But something had changed when a process server had approached her just as she reached the courthouse steps. The legal documents, all 200 pages of them, had been handed to her in full view of the cameras. And that's when the mask had slipped. For just a moment, as Bondi had looked at the cover page of the lawsuit, her face had the confidence vanished, replaced by something raw and unguarded. Shock, fear, maybe even panic. The cameras had caught it all, that split second when Pam Bondi, the unflappable legal warrior, had looked genuinely terrified. She'd recovered quickly, of course. Within seconds, the mask was back in place. But it was too late. The image was already being shared millions of times. Bondi's face was trending within minutes. Inside the courthouse, the scene was even more dramatic. Bondi's legal team had hastily convened in a conference room, poring over the lawsuit. What they found was devastating. This wasn't just a defamation claim. It was a meticulously documented case that included emails showing Bondi knew her accusations were false, testimony from former Bondi staffers about the deliberate smear campaign, financial records showing coordination with dark money groups to spread the lies, evidence of similar patterns with other victims of Bondi's attacks, a claim for punitive damages based on malicious intent. One of Bondi's attorneys, reading through the evidence section, had actually whispered, "Jesus Christ, she has everything." Meanwhile, Crockett had taken the podium outside, and her words were carefully chosen to maximum effect. For too long, politicians like Pam Bondi have believed they can destroy anyone who stands in their way with lies and fabrications. They believe that their connections, their money, their power makes them untouchable. Today, I'm here to say, no more. The crowd had erupted, but Crockett had continued, her voice rising. Bondi accused me of betraying my country, of taking bribes, of corruption. She did this knowing it was false. She did this to destroy me, to silence me, to remove me as an obstacle to her ambitions. But she made one mistake. She underestimated me. I have the receipts, Crockett had said, holding up a flash drive. Emails, documents, recordings, everything showing not just that her accusations were false, but that she knew they were false. This lawsuit isn't just about clearing my name. It's about sending a message that in America, even the powerful must face consequences for their lies. The progressive crowd had gone wild, chanting "Justice, justice," while the MAGA supporters had tried to drown them out with witch hunt. Inside the courthouse, Bondi had been watching on a monitor. According to witnesses, she'd stood frozen, her face pale, as Crockett had continued, "I'm not just suing for defamation. I'm suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, for conspiracy, for racketeering under RICO statutes. Because what Pam Bondi did wasn't just wrong, it was criminal." That's when Bondi had made her second mistake of the day. Unable to contain herself, she'd stormed out of the conference room and headed for the courthouse steps, ignoring her lawyer's attempts to stop her. "This is ridiculous," she'd shouted as she'd emerged, her composure finally cracking. "This is nothing but a political stunt by a desperate Democrat who knows she's been exposed." But her voice had cracked on the word exposed, and everyone had heard it. The woman who'd never shown weakness was rattled, and it was obvious to everyone watching. Crockett had turned to face her directly, and the confrontation everyone had been waiting for was finally happening. The two women stood 20 feet apart, separated by police and reporters, but the electricity between them was undeniable. "If it's ridiculous," Crockett had said calmly, "then you should have no problem proving that in court. Unless, of course, you're afraid of what a jury will see when they review the evidence." Bondi had started to respond, but her lead attorney had physically pulled her back, whispering urgently in her ear. Whatever he'd said had worked. Bondi had stopped talking, but the damage was done. She looked defensive, guilty even. The moment had been captured from every angle, and within hours, body language experts on every major network were analyzing the confrontation. "Look at Bondi's shoulders," one expert on CNN had noted. "They're raised, tense. That's a classic defensive posture. And notice how she won't make direct eye contact with Crockett. That's often a sign of deception or shame." On Fox News, they'd tried to spin it differently, but even their commentators had struggled. Bondi seemed unprepared, one had admitted reluctantly. She's usually so polished, but today she looked caught off guard. But the real bombshell had come later that afternoon, when Crockett's team had released a preview of their evidence, just enough to prove they weren't bluffing. The most damaging piece was an audio recording of Bondi talking to a major donor, saying, "Don't worry about Crockett. By the time I'm done with her, she'll be so toxic that even Democrats will abandon her." Truth doesn't matter if you repeat the lie enough times. The recording had gone viral instantly. Truth does matter became the #1 trending topic globally. Even some conservative commentators had been forced to admit it looked bad for Bondi. As the sun set on that first day, the battle lines were drawn. Bondi had retreated to Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate for an emergency strategy session. Reports leaked that the meeting had been contentious, with Trump himself reportedly furious not about the lies, but about Bondi getting caught. Meanwhile, Crockett had returned to her office, where she'd been greeted by hundreds of supporters. She'd looked tired but determined as she'd addressed them. "This is just the beginning. Bondi thought she could destroy me with lies. Now she's going to learn what happens when you attack someone who fights back with the truth." The legal proceedings that followed were unlike anything Washington had ever seen. Within 48 hours of the lawsuit being filed, Crockett's legal team had issued subpoenas to dozens of key figures in Bondi's orbit. The panic in the Trump camp was palpable. The first crack in Bondi's defense came from an unexpected source, her own former chief of staff, Marcus Webb. Webb, who'd worked with Bondi for over a decade, had initially stood by her. But when faced with the prospect of perjury charges, he'd made a deal with Crockett's lawyers. His deposition, leaked to the press, was explosive. Webb described in detail how Bondi had orchestrated what he called destruction campaigns against political opponents. She had a whole system, Webb had testified. First, you create a narrative, doesn't matter if it's true, then you feed it to friendly media. By the time the target responds, the damage is done. When asked specifically about the allegations against Crockett, Webb's testimony was damning. Miss Bondi knew there was no evidence of foreign bribes. We looked hard. When we couldn't find anything, she said, "Then we'll create the appearance of something." Those were her exact words. The deposition had been released on a Friday afternoon, perfectly timed to dominate the weekend news cycle. Every major network led with it. Even Fox News couldn't ignore it, though they tried to minimize the damage, with panels discussing disgruntled former employees. But Bondi's troubles were just beginning. The following Monday, Crockett's team released what they called Evidence Bundle A, a collection of emails that painted a picture of deliberate, malicious defamation. One email chain was particularly devastating. In it, Bondi had written to a conservative media operative, "We need to push the China angle hard on Crockett. I know we don't have proof, but if we say it enough, people will believe it. Remember, it's not about truth, it's about repetition." The operative had responded with concerns about potential legal liability, to which Bondi had replied, "Don't worry about that. By the time any lawsuit could happen, I'll be Attorney General. Who's going to prosecute me then?" The arrogance of that statement, the assumption that power would protect her from consequences, turned public opinion even more sharply against Bondi. Legal experts on every network were calling it a smoking gun. Then came the financial records. Crockett's forensic accountants had traced money flows between Bondi's political action committees and the dark money groups that had spread the false allegations. The pattern was clear. Bondi had coordinated and funded a deliberate disinformation campaign. One particular transaction stood out: $500,000, 0 cents, transferred to a group called Americans for Truth, just 2 days before they'd launched a massive social media campaign spreading the false bribery allegations. The group's director, when questioned, had admitted that Bondi's team had provided them with talking points that they were told to treat as facts. As the evidence mounted, Bondi's legal team had tried desperately to get the case dismissed. They'd filed motion after motion, claiming everything from judicial bias to constitutional violations. Every motion had been rejected, often with scathing opinions from the judge. One ruling had been particularly brutal. The defendant's claim that this lawsuit violates her First Amendment rights is not just wrong, it's absurd. The First Amendment protects free speech, not deliberate defamation. Ms. Bondi is free to express her opinions, but she is not free to knowingly spread lies to destroy another person's reputation. The turning point had come during a preliminary hearing that was supposed to be routine. Bondi herself had been required to appear, and Crockett's lead attorney, David Bowies, had been given permission to question her directly. The courtroom had been packed, with an overflow room set up for the media. Bondi had entered wearing her usual power suit, but observers noted she looked tired. Older, somehow. The stress was showing. Bowies had started gently asking about Bondi's background, her career, establishing a rapport. Bowies had relaxed slightly, perhaps thinking this wouldn't be as bad as feared. That was her mistake. "Miss Bondi," Bowies had said, his voice suddenly sharp, "I want to show you an email you sent on March 15th of this year. Can you read the highlighted portion for the court?" Bondi had looked at the document and her face had gone white. She'd been caught completely off guard. This email wasn't in any of the evidence bundles that had been released. "I need to consult with my attorney," she'd stammered. "You may consult after you read it," the judge had ruled. "Please read the highlighted portion." With a trembling voice, Bondi had read, "The Crockett problem needs to be handled permanently. If we can't find real dirt, we'll have to manufacture some. I don't care how it gets done, just make sure she's finished by the time I'm confirmed." The courtroom had erupted. Even Bondi's own lawyers had looked shocked. They hadn't known about this email. "MZ, Bondi?" Bowies had continued relentlessly. "When you wrote 'manufacture some,' were you instructing your team to create false evidence against Representative Crockett?" "That's not... it mean..." Bondi had struggled, looking desperately at her lawyers. "It's a simple question, Ms. Bondi. Were you or were you not instructing your team to fabricate evidence?" "I plead the fifth," Bondi had finally said, and the courtroom had gasped. A nominee for Attorney General pleading the fifth in a defamation case. It was unprecedented. But Bowies wasn't done. He'd produced email after email, document after document, each one more damaging than the last. By the end of the 3-hour hearing, Bowies had pleaded the fifth 17 times. The headline wrote itself. "Bowies pleads the fifth 17 times. Every major newspaper led with it. The photo of Bondi leaving the courthouse, looking defeated and small, became iconic." That night, 3 Republican senators who had previously supported Bondi's nomination announced they could no longer do so. "I cannot in good conscience vote to confirm an attorney general who pleads the fifth when asked about fabricating evidence," Senator Lisa Murkowski had said. The next morning, Bondi had tried to do damage control with an exclusive interview on Fox News. But even that had backfired spectacularly. When asked directly if she had lied about Crockett, Bondi had tried to deflect. "This is all a political witch hunt orchestrated by the radical left." "But did you lie?" The host had pressed, surprisingly aggressive for Fox News. I relied on information provided to me by sources I trusted," Bondi had said. "What sources? Can you name them?" "I can't reveal that at this time due to the ongoing litigation." "So you're saying you made accusations that could destroy someone's career, but you can't even say where you got the information?" The interview had been a disaster. Bondi had looked evasive, dishonest, guilty. Even Trump supporters were starting to abandon her. A poll released that afternoon showed that 67% of Americans believed Bondi had deliberately lied about Crockett. Then came what Crockett's team called the October surprise, even though it was now November. They'd saved their most devastating evidence for when it would have maximum impact. It was a video recording, secretly made by a whistleblower at one of Bondi's strategy meetings. The quality wasn't great, but the audio was clear enough. In it, Bondi could be heard laying out her entire plan to destroy Crockett. "He's too clean," Bondi said in the recording. "We've gone through everything. Her finances, her personal life, her entire history. There's nothing there, so we're going to have to create something. The China angle tests well with focus groups. We'll say she took bribes from Chinese nationals. By the time she can prove she didn't, the damage will be done." Someone in the meeting could be heard asking, "But what if she sues?" Bondi's response was chilling. "Let her try. I'll be Attorney General. I'll have the entire Justice Department at my disposal. She wouldn't dare." The recording was played on every major network. CNN ran it on loop. Even Fox News couldn't ignore it, though they tried to question its authenticity. A claim quickly debunked by audio experts. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Protests erupted outside Bondi's Florida home. Bondi equals liar signs appeared everywhere. Her approval rating, once at 45%, plummeted to 18%, the lowest ever recorded for an Attorney General nominee. Meanwhile, Crockett had maintained a dignified silence, letting the evidence speak for itself. But when she finally held a press conference, her words were powerful. "This was never just about me," she'd said, looking directly into the cameras. "This was about whether we're going to allow our politics to be corrupted by lies and character assassination. Pam Bondi thought she could destroy me because she had power and connections. She thought wrong." "I want to be clear," Crockett had continued, "I take no joy in this. But when someone tries to destroy you with lies, you have two choices. You can let them win, or you can fight back with the truth. I chose to fight, and the truth is winning." The most dramatic moment had come when Crockett had announced she was adding a criminal referral to her lawsuit. "Based on the evidence we've uncovered, I'm asking the Department of Justice to investigate Ms. Bondi for conspiracy, wire fraud, and racketeering. No one is above the law, not even someone nominated to be the nation's top law enforcement officer." The criminal referral had been the final nail in the coffin for Bondi's nomination. Within hours, reports emerged that Trump was privately furious, not at the lies, but at Bondi for getting caught and embarrassing him. "She was supposed to be smart," he'd reportedly raged. "This makes us all look like idiots." Republican senators began publicly calling for Bondi to withdraw her nomination. Even her staunchest allies couldn't defend the video recording. Senator Ted Cruz, asked about it, had simply said, "If the recording is authentic, it's deeply troubling." But the most satisfying moment for Crockett had come during a chance encounter in the Capitol building. She'd been walking to a committee meeting when she'd turned a corner and come face-to-face with Bondi, who was leaving a desperate last-minute meeting with senators. For a moment, the two women had stood frozen, staring at each other. The hallway had gone silent as staffers and reporters held their breath. Then Bondi had done something unexpected. She'd looked away first, unable to meet Crockett's gaze. Without a word, she'd hurried past, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "That's the look of defeat," one reporter had whispered, and indeed it was. The woman who'd tried to destroy Jasmine Crockett with lies couldn't even look her in the eye. Later that day, the news everyone had been expecting finally broke. Pam Bondi was withdrawing her nomination for Attorney General. Her statement was brief and bitter. "Due to the partisan attacks and circus atmosphere created by the radical left, I am withdrawing my nomination. This is a dark day for American justice." But nobody was buying it. Even conservative commentators acknowledged that Bondi had brought this on herself. "You can't fabricate evidence against a sitting member of Congress and expect to become Attorney General," one Fox News analyst had admitted. Bondi has no one to blame but herself. The legal case, however, was far from over. With her nomination withdrawn, Bondi had lost the political protection she'd been counting on. Her legal team had immediately moved to settle, offering $10 million, 0 cents, a fortune by any standard, but far less than the $200 million, 0 cents, Crockett was seeking. Crockett's response had been swift and brutal. "No settlement. This goes to trial." The American people deserved to see all the evidence of what Pam Bondi tried to do. The trial date was set for 6 months out, and legal experts were already calling it the trial of the century. But in many ways, Crockett had already won. She'd exposed Bondi's lies, destroyed her political career, and sent a message to anyone else who might think about using the same tactics. The aftermath of the confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Pam Bondi sent shockwaves through American politics that would be felt for years to come. What had started as a defamation lawsuit had become something much larger, a reckoning with the politics of personal destruction that had poisoned American democracy for decades. In the immediate aftermath of Bondi's withdrawal, the floodgates opened. 3 other women who had been victims of similar smear campaigns by Bondi came forward, emboldened by Crockett's victory. Each had their own story of false accusations, manufactured scandals, and careers nearly destroyed. Sarah Martinez, a former Florida prosecutor, revealed how Bondi had fabricated ethics violations against her when she'd tried to investigate one of Bondi's political allies. "I stayed quiet for years because I was afraid," Martinez said in an emotional interview. "But watching Jasmine Crockett stand up to her gave me courage. If she could do it, so could I." Jennifer Thompson, a former state senator, told how Bondi had spread false rumors about an affair to torpedo her gubernatorial campaign. "She didn't just lie about me," Thompson explained. "She created fake social media accounts, hired private investigators to follow me, even paid people to make false statements. It was a complete fabrication, but by the time I could prove it, my campaign was dead." The third woman, District Attorney Amy Chen, had the most shocking story. Bondi had accused her of being connected to organized crime, a completely baseless allegation that had nevertheless destroyed her career. "I'm Asian American," Chen said. "She played on stereotypes and prejudices. She knew exactly what she was doing." These women filed their own lawsuits, and suddenly Bondi was facing not one but 4 major legal battles. Her legal bills were mounting. Reports suggested she was spending over $100,000, 0 cents a week on her defense. Her once substantial wealth was evaporating. But the political implications were even more significant. The Republican Party found itself in crisis mode. How many other nominations had been secured through similar tactics? How many careers had been destroyed by lies? The questions were uncomfortable, and the answers were even worse. An internal GOP investigation, leaked to the press, revealed that Bondi's tactics weren't isolated. There was an entire network of operatives who specialized in what they called narrative creation, a euphemism for character assassination. The report identified at least a dozen other cases where false allegations had been used to destroy political opponents. The scandal had a name now, Bondigate, and it was growing bigger by the day. Democrats seized on the scandal, with Chuck Schumer calling for a Senate investigation into systematic defamation as a political weapon. But it wasn't just Democrats who were angry. Many Republicans, especially younger ones who'd entered politics hoping to focus on policy, were disgusted by what had been revealed. "This isn't conservatism," said freshman Representative Jake Morrison, a 34-year-old Republican from Ohio. "This is corruption. We're supposed to be the party of law and order, not lies and destruction." A group of young Republicans formed what they called the Truth Caucus, vowing to reject the politics of personal destruction. Their leader, Senator Hannah Williams from Utah, gave a powerful speech on the Senate floor. For too long, both parties have engaged in the politics of personal destruction. But what Pam Bondi did to Jasmine Crockett wasn't politics, it was criminal. We cannot claim to be the party of values while we destroy people with lies. It ends now, each. The speech went viral, with millions of views across social media platforms. The generational divide in the GOP was becoming a chasm, with older establishment figures defending Bondi, albeit weakly, while younger members called for a complete reformation of how the party operated. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett had become a national figure. Her courage in standing up to Bondi had made her a hero to millions. Her social media following had exploded from 200,000 to over 5 million. Every appearance she made drew massive crowds. There was already talk of her running for Senate, maybe even president someday. But Crockett remained focused on the case. In interviews, she consistently brought the conversation back to the larger issues at stake. "This isn't about me," she would say. "This is about whether we're going to have a democracy where truth matters, or whether we're going to let people with power destroy anyone who stands in their way with lies." Her discipline and focus only increased her popularity. Even some conservatives admired her refusal to gloat or overreach. "She could have made this all about her," one Republican strategist admitted privately. "Instead, she's made it about principles. That's dangerous for us. She's becoming bigger than just another Democrat politician." The discovery phase of the trial was producing new revelations almost daily. Bondi's emails, text messages, and phone records painted a picture of someone who had weaponized lies as a standard political tool. One particularly damaging email showed Bondi instructing her team to find 3 lies that sound believable about a political opponent. Remember, she'd written, it doesn't have to be true, it just has to be repeated enough times. The email had been sent to a distribution list of 43 people, all political operatives, media figures, and donors. When Crockett's team subpoenaed those 43 people, panic spread through conservative circles. How many of them had participated in spreading lies? How many could face their own legal consequences? Several high-profile conservative media figures suddenly announced they were taking breaks from their shows. Others lawyered up and refused to comment. The ecosystem that had enabled Bondi's lies was crumbling. Then came another bombshell. Financial records showed that Bondi had received millions in payments from dark money groups linked to foreign nationals. The very crime she'd falsely accused Crockett of, taking foreign money, she had actually committed herself. The irony was lost on no one. It's always projection with these people, one commentator noted. They accuse others of what they're doing themselves. The foreign money trail led to Russian oligarchs and Saudi princes, all funneled through shell companies and PACs. The Department of Justice, now under pressure to act, opened a criminal investigation. Bondi went from facing a civil lawsuit to potentially facing federal charges. Her fall from grace was complete. The woman who'd almost become America's top law enforcement officer was now facing the possibility of prison. Her speaking engagements were canceled. Her book deal was withdrawn. Even Fox News, which had championed her for years, distanced themselves. In a desperate attempt to salvage something, Bondi tried to negotiate a settlement again. This time, she offered $50 million, 0 cents, a quarter of what Crockett was seeking, but still an enormous sum. She also offered a public apology, an admission of wrongdoing. Crockett's team considered it. $50 million, 0 cents would be a victory by any measure. The public apology would be humiliating for Bondi. Many advised Crockett to take it, but Crockett had other ideas. In a move that shocked everyone, she made a counteroffer. She would accept $1, 0 cents in damages, yes, $1, if Bondi agreed to the following terms. 1. A full public confession, detailing every lie and every person involved in spreading them. 2. Cooperation with all criminal investigations. 3. A lifetime ban on working in politics or political media. 4. Establishment of a $50 million 0 cents fund for victims of political defamation. 5. 500 hours of community service teaching ethics at law schools. The counteroffer was brilliant. It showed that Crockett wasn't motivated by money, but by justice. It also put Bondi in an impossible position: accept and lose everything, or refuse and risk even worse at trial. The public response was overwhelming. $1 for justice began trending globally. Even international media picked up the story, with newspapers from London to Tokyo covering Crockett's principled stand. Bondi's team asked for time to consider, but while they deliberated, more evidence kept emerging. A former Bondi aide released recordings of strategy sessions where Bondi had explicitly said, "Truth is whatever we say it is. Reality is what we create." Another email surfaced where Bondi had written, "Crockett is too clean, too smart, too dangerous. We need to destroy her before she becomes a real threat." The pressure was mounting from all sides. Trump, who had initially supported Bondi, now pretended he barely knew her. "I hardly knew the woman," he said at a rally. He was recommended by others. "I had nothing to do with her problems." Even Bondi's own family was reportedly urging her to accept Crockett's offer. Her elderly mother, in a rare public statement, said, "I raised my daughter to tell the truth. I don't know when she lost her way, but it's time to make things right." As the trial date approached, Bondi's options were running out. Her legal team was hemorrhaging. 2 of her top lawyers quit, citing irreconcilable differences about legal strategy. Translation: they knew the case was unwinnable. Then, just 2 weeks before the trial was set to begin, Bondi caved. She accepted Crockett's terms, all of them. The announcement was made at a packed press conference at the federal courthouse. Bondi stood at the podium, looking older, smaller, defeated. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she read her confession. "I, Pam Bondi, admit that I knowingly and deliberately spread false information about Representative Jasmine Crockett. I knew the allegations of foreign bribes were untrue. I knew the accusations of corruption were baseless. I created these lies as part of a political strategy to destroy someone I saw as a threat." She continued for 20 minutes, detailing the entire conspiracy. She named names, political operatives, media figures, donors who had all participated in spreading the lies. By the time she finished, she had implicated dozens of powerful people. The confession sent shockwaves through Washington. Within hours, 3 more criminal investigations were opened. A major conservative media network faced a massive shareholder lawsuit. Several political operatives fled the country. Crockett stood to speak after Bondi finished. She was gracious, but firm. Today, truth won. Not because I'm special, but because we as a society decided that lies cannot be allowed to destroy our democracy. Ms. Bondi's confession is just the beginning. We must root out the cancer of deliberate deception wherever it exists, regardless of party. She then did something unexpected. She walked over to Bondi and extended her hand. Bondi, tears streaming down her face, shook it. The photo of that handshake, Crockett standing tall and dignified, Bondi broken and humiliated, became one of the most iconic political images of the decade. In the months that followed, the Crockett effect transformed American politics. New laws were passed, making deliberate political defamation a federal crime. Social media platforms implemented new systems to flag and remove demonstrably false allegations. Media outlets instituted stricter fact-checking standards. The Truth Caucus that had formed in response to the scandal grew into a significant bipartisan movement. Young politicians from both parties pledged to focus on policy differences rather than personal destruction. While American politics remained divisive, the worst excesses of character assassination became socially and legally unacceptable. Jasmine Crockett's career soared. She was named Time's Person of the Year. Her book, Truth Matters: How One Lawsuit Changed American Politics, became an instant bestseller. She was flooded with speaking requests, endorsement opportunities, and pleas to run for higher office. But she remained focused on her work in Congress, now with unprecedented influence. Her legislation passed with bipartisan support. Her endorsement became one of the most sought after in politics. When she spoke, the nation listened. Pam Bondi, meanwhile, disappeared from public life. She moved to a small town in Montana, where she worked at a local legal aid clinic, part of her community service. Former colleagues who encountered her said she was a changed person, quiet, humble, haunted by what she'd done. The $50 million zero-cents fund Bondi was forced to establish helped dozens of victims of political defamation rebuild their lives. Sarah Martinez used her settlement to run for Congress and won. Jennifer Thompson became a successful political commentator, dedicated to calling out lies wherever she saw them. Amy Chen was appointed to a federal judgeship, her reputation fully restored. The ripple effects continued for years. Political science textbooks added chapters on the Crockett-Bondi case as a turning point in American political culture. Law schools taught it as a cautionary tale about the limits of political speech. Ethics courses used it as an example of how power corrupts and how courage can defeat corruption. International observers pointed to the case as evidence that American democracy, despite its flaws, still had the capacity for self-correction. In many countries, wrote a British political scientist, Bondi would have succeeded in destroying Crockett. That she failed and faced consequences shows that American institutions, while stressed, still function. That looks uncompromisable. But perhaps the most important legacy was the message it sent to future generations of politicians. You can't destroy your opponents with lies and expect to get away with it. Truth eventually wins. 5 years later, when Jasmine Crockett announced her run for the United States Senate, she referenced the case that had defined her career. 5 years ago, someone tried to destroy me with lies. They failed not because I was strong, but because truth is stronger than any lie. Today I'm running for Senate not as someone who survived an attack, but as someone who proved that in America, truth still matters. Her announcement video went viral within minutes, 50 million views in the first 24 hours. The comments section was filled with people sharing their own stories of standing up to lies and injustice, inspired by what Crockett had done. Political analysts noted that Crockett had done something remarkable. She turned what could have been a career-ending attack into the foundation of a movement. Most politicians who face these kinds of attacks either crumble or become bitter, one observed. Crockett became stronger and more principled. That's why she's going to be a force in American politics for decades to come. As for the broader implications, the case had fundamentally changed how political campaigns were run. Opposition research still existed, but it focused on actual policy differences and real scandals, not manufactured ones. The risk of facing a Crockett-style lawsuit made the cost of lying too high. Media coverage changed too. Outlets became much more careful about repeating unverified allegations. The phrase "according to sources" was no longer enough. Journalists demanded documentation, evidence, proof. The old game of repeat the allegation and let the target try to disprove it was over. Some argued that politics had become too sanitized, that the fear of lawsuits had made politicians overly cautious. But most Americans disagreed. Polls showed that 78% of voters preferred the post-Crockett political environment to what had come before. The legal precedents set by the case were equally important. Courts across the country cited Crockett v. Bondi in defamation cases, establishing stronger protections for victims of deliberate political lies. The Supreme Court, in a landmark 7-2 decision, upheld the principle that deliberate falsification for political gain was not protected speech. Law schools created entire courses around the case. Harvard's Truth, Lies, and the Law became one of its most popular classes. Yale's Political Speech and Its Limits used the Crockett-Bondi transcripts as its primary text. Stanford created the Crockett Center for Political Ethics, dedicated to researching and promoting truthful political discourse. The international impact was significant too. Countries around the world studied the case and implemented similar reforms. The European Union passed the Crockett Directive, strengthening protections against political defamation. Australia, Canada, and New Zealand all enacted similar legislation. In an ironic twist, Russia and China tried to use the case as propaganda, claiming it showed American democracy was flawed. But their efforts backfired when their own citizens pointed out that in their countries, Bondi would never have faced any consequences at all. The case became a symbol of democratic accountability rather than democratic weakness. Technology companies were forced to adapt as well. Social media platforms developed sophisticated AI systems to detect and flag potential defamation. While not perfect, these systems made it much harder for false allegations to go viral before they could be fact-checked. The Bondi alert became a common feature, a warning that appeared when someone tried to share unverified allegations about a public figure. Users could still share the content, but they had to acknowledge they'd been warned it might be false. Some of the most interesting effects were cultural rather than legal or political. The phrase, "don't pull a Bondi," entered common usage, meaning don't tell a lie that will come back to destroy you. High school debate clubs studied the case. Business schools taught it as a lesson in ethical leadership. The entertainment industry took notice too. Within 2 years, 3 different movies about the case were in production. A prestigious HBO miniseries, Truth Matters, won multiple Emmys. Crockett was played by an Oscar-winning actress who called it the role of a lifetime, playing someone who stood up to power and won. Bondi refused all requests to participate in these productions. From her exile in Montana, she issued a single statement: "I hope my mistakes serve as a warning to others. The truth always comes out. Always." As the 10-year anniversary of the lawsuit approached, historians were already calling it one of the most consequential legal cases in American history. Not for the money involved, Crockett had only taken that symbolic $1, but for what it represented and what it changed. A comprehensive study by Princeton University found that political defamation had decreased by 87% since the case. False allegations still occurred, but they were quickly debunked and their spreaders faced swift consequences. The culture of consequence that Crockett had created had fundamentally changed American politics. In her memoir, written 10 years after the case, Crockett reflected on what it all meant. "I never intended to become a symbol. I just wanted to clear my name and continue serving my constituents. But sometimes history chooses you. When Pam Bondi decided to destroy me with lies, she forced me to make a choice: surrender or fight. I chose to fight not just for myself, but for everyone who'd been destroyed by lies and had no way to fight back. The victory wasn't mine alone. It belonged to every person who shared my story, who supported me, who understood that this was about more than one lawsuit. It was about deciding what kind of democracy we wanted to be." Do I forgive Pam Bondi? Yes, she paid a terrible price for her actions. Her career destroyed, her reputation in ruins, her life's work reduced to a cautionary tale. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We must never forget how close we came to normalizing the politics of destruction. The young people entering politics today don't fully understand how bad it was before. They take for granted that you can't just make up lies about your opponents. That's good. It means we've progressed. But we must remain vigilant. The temptation to destroy rather than debate will always exist. We must resist it. If there's one lesson from my experience, it's this: truth is not partisan. It doesn't belong to Democrats or Republicans, liberals or conservatives. It belongs to all of us. And when we defend truth, we defend democracy itself. That's why I took just $1 from Pam Bondi, because this was never about money. It was about something priceless, the integrity of our democratic discourse. And that, unlike money, is something worth fighting for. The book became required reading in many political science programs. But more importantly, it inspired a new generation of politicians who entered public service not to destroy their opponents, but to serve their constituents. 20 years after the lawsuit, America was a different place. The Crockett Doctrine, the principle that deliberate political defamation would face severe consequences, was as established as the First Amendment itself. Jasmine Crockett had served 2 terms in the Senate before being appointed to the Supreme Court, where she became known for her fierce defense of both free speech and truth. Her confirmation hearing was notably civil. Even her opponents wouldn't dare make false allegations against her. In her Supreme Court chambers, she kept a framed copy of the $1 check from Bondi, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Under it was a simple plaque: Truth Matters. Pam Bondi had served her community service, paid her fund obligations, and disappeared completely from public life. Reports suggested she'd changed her name and moved abroad. The few who claimed to have encountered her said she seemed at peace, finally free from the ambition and anger that had driven her to such destructive acts. The other women who'd come forward, Martinez, Thompson, and Chen, had all gone on to successful careers. They formed a support group for victims of political defamation, helping others navigate the legal and emotional challenges of fighting back against lies. The media landscape had been transformed. The old model of report first, verify later was dead. News organizations that printed false allegations faced swift lawsuits and massive settlements. The result was slower but more accurate journalism, a trade-off most Americans were happy to make. Social media had evolved too. The Wild West days of anonymous accounts spreading unverified allegations were over. Platforms required verification for anyone making claims about public figures. Free speech remained protected, but lying had consequences. Politics was still divisive. Americans still disagreed passionately about taxes, healthcare, foreign policy, and countless other issues, but the disagreements were about real positions and actual policies, not manufactured scandals and false allegations. Young politicians studied the Crockett-Bondi case like military students study famous battles. They learned that courage in the face of lies could not only save your career, but transform your country. They learned that truth, while sometimes slow, was ultimately unstoppable. In journalism schools, the case was taught as a watershed moment, when the media was forced to choose between sensationalism and responsibility. Most chose responsibility, and those that didn't paid the price in lost credibility and lawsuit. The international community watched and learned. Democracies worldwide implemented their own versions of the Crockett Doctrine. Authoritarian regimes pointed to it as evidence of Western hypocrisy, but their citizens saw it differently, as proof that in democracies, even the powerful could be held accountable. As America moved forward, the lesson of Jasmine Crockett versus Pam Bondi remained clear. In a democracy, truth isn't just an ideal, it's a necessity. And when someone tries to destroy that truth for political gain, there will be consequences. The case had started with a simple defamation lawsuit. It had ended by transforming American democracy. Not bad for a $1.00 settlement, but the real victory wasn't measured in money or even in political change. It was measured in the countless people who now entered public service knowing they could focus on serving their constituents rather than destroying their opponents. It was measured in the voters who could now trust that the allegations they heard were real rather than manufactured. It was measured in a democracy that had proved it could heal itself. That was Jasmine Crockett's true legacy. Not that she had won a lawsuit, but that her courage had made winning through lies impossible for everyone who came after. And there you have it, the complete story of how Jasmine Crockett didn't just defeat Pam Bondi in court, but transformed American politics forever. And this wasn't just about one lawsuit or one victory. This was about standing up to power, fighting lies with truth, and proving that in America, justice isn't just a word, it's a promise. If this story inspired you, if you believe that truth matters in our democracy, then don't let it end here. Hit that like button to show your support for those who stand up to lies Subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell because we'll be bringing you more stories of courage, truth, and justice that the mainstream media won't tell you. Share this video with everyone you know who needs to hear that truth still wins, that courage still matters, and that one person standing up to power can change everything. Leave a comment below. What did you think of Crockett's decision to take just $1? Would you have done the same? Remember, every like, every share, every subscription sends a message that we demand truth in our politics. We're building a community here of people who won't accept lies, who won't be silent when powerful people try to destroy the innocent. This is just the beginning. We've got more explosive stories coming your way. Stories of corruption exposed, justice served, and truth triumphant. You won't want to miss a single one, so subscribe now, hit that bell, and become part of the movement for truth in politics. Because as Jasmine Crockett proved, when we stand together for truth, we don't just win, we transform our nation. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring about truth, and remember, in America, truth doesn't just matter, truth wins.